Gabby. Welcome to the Happier Life Project, brought to you by leading mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self, in partnership with the Priory Healthcare. In today's episode of the podcast, we are going to dig into simple steps to building self-esteem. Self-esteem is how we value and perceive ourselves. It's based on our own opinions and beliefs, which sometimes feel really difficult to change. Having low self-esteem isn't a mental health problem in itself, but they are closely linked. If there are many factors affecting your self-esteem for a long time, this might lead to mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, social phobia, an eating disorder, or substance abuse. So it's really important, if we are suffering with our self-esteem, we don't ignore it. Some of the most common examples of how we might experience low self-esteem include feeling hopeless or worthless, blaming yourself unfairly, hating yourself, worrying about being unable to do certain things. In today's episode of the podcast, we are really going to explore why we can view ourselves in such a negative way and what steps we can do to challenge and change these negative views and quieten our inner critic. Natalie Englander is a principal CBT therapist and mindfulness teacher with over 10 years' experience in the field. Specialising in helping millennial women overcome perfectionism and build self-esteem, Natalie offers online CBT, mindfulness courses, and therapist supervision. In our conversation, Natalie explains what is self-esteem, why having healthy self-esteem is so important in our life, and how setting boundaries with others can help us on our quest to building a happier life. Natalie also shares her top 5 ways to tackle low self-esteem and set some simple practical homework to help enrich our lives. Ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome, Natalie Englander, to the Happier Life Project. Before we dive into today's topic, which is all about self-esteem, let's introduce you to our listeners and our app users. You're a principal CBT therapist and mindfulness teacher with over 10 years experience. You specialise in helping millennial women overcome perfection and build self-esteem, offering online CBT, mindfulness courses, and therapist supervision. What's therapist supervision? What does that mean?
So all therapists have usually weekly or monthly supervision where they talk about the clients that they're seeing and working with.
I didn't know
so
that.
It's a great space. Yeah, where you can chat to your supervisor and let them know how things are going, anything you're struggling with, how you can better help your client. So it's a really valuable space.
Getting into self-esteem. And actually, I think that, marrying the two, perfectionism and self-esteem, that you don't always think somebody who's a perfectionist could possibly be struggling with their self-esteem because maybe they're masking it with all these achievements and a really nice house, or, pick your own adventure there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I guess you can be a perfectionist without having low self-esteem, but more often than not, the perfectionists that I see do also have low self-esteem. I kind of always think of it as two different types of low self-esteem. There's either the ones where it's sort of obvious, someone is saying, I feel really rubbish about myself, I don't think I'm good enough, I feel worthless, etc. Or you can get the ones who have more what I like to call dormant low self-esteem, where maybe on the surface they do feel all right, they can recognize, I'm doing well, things are good, etc. But it's not until then, if something happens, let's say they mess up or they fail at an interview or something like that, then suddenly there can be a really strong reaction and they just feel absolutely rubbish about themselves. And it's almost like a surprise. Where did this come from? So it's sort of down there lurking
Yeah, I
Yeah.
resonate with that, and I'm imagining that a lot of other people right now are going, "Oh, that's me." So to kind of start off with the very basics, can we define what is self-esteem? You mentioned about the two categories of like low self-esteem and like even what causes us to have low self-esteem, because we're not born
Mm.
with it, are we?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I guess for me, low self-esteem is all about how you perceive yourself. So it's based on your opinions and the beliefs that you hold about yourself. And if you've got healthy self-esteem, then that's great because that's linked to having positive mental health and well-being. And healthy self-esteem is really just important in life. Whereas if you have low self-esteem, then you generally view yourself in quite a negative way,
Mm.
and you evaluate yourself in quite a negative way. So you might experience quite a lot of self-critical thoughts. I'm rubbish at this, or I'm boring, or I'm not very fun, or I'm unattractive. And I guess we hold that really negative view of ourselves. And it
Yeah.
might be helpful to say actually the slight difference between self-esteem and self-worth.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
so if self-esteem is how you think and feel about yourself, which with low self-esteem can be negative, it can change depending on how things are going. So if things are going well, we might feel a bit better about ourselves. If things are going worse, we might start to feel more rubbish about ourselves. Whereas self-worth is maybe more global and more stable than our self-esteem. So it doesn't tend to sort of change as much. And our
Mm.
self-worth is all about kind of knowing and believing our worth as a person. So if self-esteem
Right.
is how we evaluate ourselves, it can either be good or bad, whereas self-worth is more about being a valuable person or a lovable person.
Right. Our place in
Um,
the world, kind of.
yes, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you could have your self-esteem that hits rock bottom, but you can still hold on to that notion that you've got innate worth,
Mm.
um, which is really important because when you don't feel good about yourself, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're no longer a valuable person. So sometimes people can still have self-worth but low self-esteem, or sometimes you can, both can be bad.
Right. Right.
Um,
And you deal with all different walks, I'd imagine.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, perfectionism is really tied to our self-worth, where
Right.
we feel as though we need to achieve, and that achievement essentially is our measure of our self-worth,
That makes
which can be
sense.
really dangerous if you think about it. If you don't
Mm.
perform well, you're not even a valuable person.
Mm.
Um, and I guess self-esteem and self-worth and perfectionism, I don't think they're necessarily caused by one single thing. But as you say, it's definitely not something we're born with. I think
Yeah.
it can develop over time based on a number of factors. I think our childhood experiences definitely have a big factor to play in it. Whether we've grown up in a household and with family and friends who are supportive, loving and kind towards us, or maybe
Yeah.
we've experienced quite a negative environment, lots of criticism or even abuse. All of that can have an impact on the beliefs that we start to form about ourselves, and that we
Yeah.
usually then carry through into adulthood.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that it's the external stuff that we take in and
Mm.
internalize, then the product is our self-worth, I guess. When I think about my own self-esteem, I think about it as like a voice in my head, and it's either like a cheerleader or it's really nasty and my worst enemy. Rumination on negative thoughts and expecting negative outcomes to future events, that's something I particularly struggle with.
Mm.
And I just wondered what your thoughts were there, because I don't know if, does it help to maybe separate yourself and it's like that voice is not you? Is that something helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what we sometimes call our inner critic that we can
Yeah.
have. And some people have a much louder or a much more mean inner critic than others.
Mm, mm,
Um, and I think it's really useful to be aware of it, and to start building more awareness so that we can spot and notice when it happens.
mm.
Because I guess the first step to making any changes is just having more awareness. Because I think often lots of people with low self-esteem maybe don't even recognize half the negative thoughts that they have about themselves throughout a day. Because we just have so many thoughts running through our head constantly, don't we? We don't necessarily stop to really pay attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, everybody has periods in their life where self-worth they're going to struggle with, periods of low self-esteem they're going to struggle, and that's normal. And there's tools that we're going to get into that can really help us manage those difficult times. But then when does it become something more severe that we need professional help? We need to think about professional help and seeing somebody like yourself. Is it when it's more consistent, there's like no break from it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think anyone with low self-esteem, I would always say therapy's great. I think therapy's great even if you're feeling fine. And I would generally always encourage someone to seek support, to work on it, because self-esteem can have a big impact on our lives without us even realizing. And I think often as well, people tend to think that like it's just me, or it's just my personality, or I'm just not a very confident person. Whereas I would argue that that's not the case, and that you don't have to have low self-esteem, and that actually you can feel good about yourself and you can feel more confident. Of course, though, if you find that you're feeling anxious and depressed, which often comes up for people with low self-esteem, then yes, definitely do seek support, because you don't need to continue feeling that way, and it can be such a relief to see a good therapist who can help you feel better.
Yeah. So have you seen firsthand then people really shift the way they see themselves through working with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I guess, like a joyous, amazing experience to see people, how they are in the first session, and the kind of things that they tell you, how they view themselves, how they feel about themselves, to then the end of the session. There can just be such a big transformation. And usually people never believe that that's going to be possible. But yeah, I've definitely seen firsthand it is.
Wow.
And it has such a good impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
People feel more confident to do things that they never would have dreamed of doing before. And they're no longer feeling anxious all the time or getting into depressive cycles regularly.
Yeah, you kind of lit up when you
Yeah.
were talking then, so I can tell that it's obviously definitely gets you jazzed at forgetting to go into work, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Definitely.
when we're talking about self-worth, self-confidence, self-esteem, it all starts with the self. So like we can get, I'm sure, boost to the ego or boost to our self-esteem from other people, but if we're really gonna, challenge these issues that we have to go inwards and do the work ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I
Because I guess
think that,
people would think, I never, sorry, to cut you off there, but like, I want a new relationship, but I'm never going to get somebody that's, I'm not good enough for that person that I really want, or I'm not clever enough to get that job.
yeah, absolutely. That's where I think it does all start with yourself, and believing in yourself, and believing that you can have those things and that you deserve those things as well. And I think often self-esteem our self-esteem can be influenced by those around us and our environment. But that doesn't necessarily mean if we change our environment or we change the people around us, suddenly we'll feel good about ourselves. That's not always the case. And that's where we do need to go inwards and work on things ourselves, so that we're then also not using those external factors to try and make ourselves feel better about ourselves.
The Happier Life Project is a podcast which is attached to My Possible Self, a mental health app. And what kind of mental health problems, when we are looking at somebody who is severely struggling with their self-esteem, and what kind of mental health problems could be associated with or contributed to having low self-esteem?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say definitely depression and definitely anxiety. particularly generalized anxiety disorder, which is when we tend to worry about anything and everything. We're just constantly feeling anxious, on edge, struggle to relax, etc. But I think it shows up a lot. I see in people with social anxiety who worry about kind of embarrassing themselves or making a fool of themselves in front of other people. And then I guess other mental health problems like eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorder, they're all can be really linked to our self-esteem. So it's definitely important to work on it.
Do you treat then the anxiety, or do you treat the self-esteem, or it's like, is it the chicken and the egg situation?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Technically, the answer is if someone has a mental health problem like depression or an anxiety disorder and low self-esteem, you should really always treat the mental health problem, that disorder first, and then you can work on low self-esteem afterwards. But often what I find is that the two are sort of caught up together. So you might be working on, say, the depression, but you'll also kind of be working on the low self-esteem as well at the same time, really. But I guess the main takeaway from that is if someone came to me and let's say they had social anxiety and low self-esteem, and they told me, I really want to focus on my low self-esteem, I would say, yes, absolutely, great idea. We can do that, but we kind of also need to work on the social anxiety. We can't just leave that.
Right, got it. I have spent the last 6 years living in America, and when I think about, like, you and I both British, and we've brought up to believe that like championing ourselves is kind of cocky and big-headed, and living in America, they're such big advocates for themselves as well as each other. And I wonder, do we need to take a bit more of an American approach to life? Because I do feel that, just from my observations, I know Americans suffer with self-esteem problems as well. However, they just seem to be brought up differently, that from kids they're raised to be the star of their own show. Whereas with us, we're told to be a bit more modest. And I just wonder, when we're talking about self-esteem, is it like part of our upbringing is to be more shy, more modest?
Absolutely. I think we definitely need to try and be more American in that sense of championing ourselves. Is just very British, isn't it? To not want to say anything good about yourself. Or if someone does say something good about you or pay you a compliment, that you sort of downplay it or dismiss it or discount it. And I think that even though we might not think that has much of an impact, it does. If you spend your life always sort of ignoring your positive qualities or discounting your successes, that's going to sink in eventually, versus if you're someone who acknowledges, yes, I'm a really nice person and I'm really good at this and I did really well here and I'm going to tell some other people about it. I think that will have a difference on how we feel about ourselves. And I mean, Americans are already doing well and ahead of the Brits in terms of having therapy.
That's true. Yeah.
I love that in America it's a lot more sort of normal, in inverted commas.
Yeah, it's like going to the hairdresser.
To have therapy. Yeah, exactly. And that is how I would love for therapy to be in the UK. We get our hair done, we get our nails done, we go to the dentist and look after our teeth, we go to the optician and look after our eyes. We look after just about anything and everything except our mental health. And we don't do that unless we're really, really struggling.
It's wild, isn't it? When you put it like that, why are we not prioritizing something that is surely more important than our roots?
Yep. Exactly.
So, and what about building each other up as well, and sort of celebrating our colleagues and our loved ones? I think we could probably do that more a little bit. And if we all started doing that to each other, then I think that might help as well. What about saying no to somebody? If we think little about ourselves, when we're setting boundaries, that well, we don't often, do we? And this is where we can be taken advantage of, I think. Any tips here?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely common for people with low self-esteem to be people pleasers or have a lack of boundaries. And I think there are definitely tips and tricks to help with it. But one thing I always say to people when I'm working with them in therapy is to just be mindful that those around you might not like it when you try and start introducing boundaries. But it doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong or bad. It's just a normal response potentially for the people in your lives who have always known you to be a particular way, always saying, yes, I can help you with this, of course I'll do that for you. And then you suddenly start saying, actually, sorry, I can't, actually I'm busy. People might not always react in the best way.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Not to sort of take that as evidence that you shouldn't be doing this. But I think one small way that people can start off with is just learning to say no to requests, but starting off really small. So either by saying no to little requests, building yourself up. So if someone's got a really big favor, that might feel much harder to say no to versus if they say, oh, do you mind just moving up so I can sit on the sofa, practice in that kind of way. And you can also pick who you practice that on. So you might have sort of easier people and scarier people.
Yeah.
In terms of saying no, some people you'll know will be understanding, and then others you'll think, oh God, they're going to hate it if I say no. So pick the easier people and work your way up. And just practice. Sometimes with low self-esteem, you do just have to fake it till you make it, which sometimes people don't like that idea, but I always advocate for that in terms of doing the things that you'd like to be doing, even if you don't feel like that's sort of the person that you are yet. Yeah, exactly. Just do it anyway. And eventually you'll start to get more comfortable and it will become who you are.
Gosh, I think about when you were talking then about like the kind of alpha type characters that can be quite dominant in terms of like, if you've got low self-esteem, it would probably be quite hard to go up against them. So I see what you mean about like working your way up.
Yeah. And that's why I think doing it in therapy as well is so useful, because you'll have your therapist each week that you see cheerleading you on, and just helping you reflect on and explore how it went, how was it, might we do it differently next time. Sometimes, not always, but when we try to enforce boundaries, if it's new to us, we can sometimes swing between maybe being a bit passive aggressive or a bit aggressive, but actually we want to try and be assertive in the middle. And that's a skill, something that takes practice. It doesn't always come naturally.
And what about in the workplace? Because it's one thing doing it at home, but then when it's like, especially if it's a manager or a boss, then it's really difficult sometimes. Yeah. Well, speaking of tips, we'll get to the juice. You put together on your website your top 5 ways to tackle low self-esteem, and I thought they were really, really great. So I thought we could do a bit of a countdown. So I'll do that in at number 5, and then you can kind of, if that's cool with you, because I think this is going to like really help. So in at number 5, stop comparing yourself to others.
Yes. So that is a big one for people with low self-esteem. And comparing yourself, I guess, to me, is a recipe for just worsening your self-esteem and making you unhappy. And I think that we experience it so much more these days with social media, because we're constantly exposed to these perfect lives on Instagram or TikTok, whatever we're on. And I think a good tip is to start noticing when you compare yourself to others. Because for me, the first step is always building awareness and noticing. And then once you become more aware of it and can spot when you're doing it, then you want to try and consciously stop yourself. So that might be to close down your Instagram in that moment. or it might be to try and change your focus of attention onto something else rather than sitting there ruminating about how, oh, everyone else has got this and I haven't got that, etc.
Yeah.
And then try and think of actually positive things about yourself, to sort of counteract. So some of the things that you like about yourself, or things that you're grateful for that you have in your life, and then try and get consistent at doing that.
It's funny you should say about Instagram, because I'm, as we're recording this, taking a little break because that's the most triggering platform for me. It must be something about images. Yeah, I could feel myself being like, oh, well, I'm not doing that. And, so I was like, this is just not making me feel good. Why am I putting myself through this? I'm just going to take a little break. But, I know I'll go back on probably in another week or so. But it feels like having a bit of a holiday from your mind.
Yeah, a holiday. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we can even unfollow those people that we notice regularly
not if they're loved ones, though.
Yes, or exactly, or you could mute people instead, because sometimes you can't unfollow someone if, as you say, it's a loved one. I mean, you can if you want to, but we all know that might be tricky. So you can mute accounts so that they don't show up as much on your feed, or their stories don't pop up as much for you.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to number 4. Cultivate self-compassion.
Yes. So I love self-compassion, particularly for people with low self-esteem. And in a nutshell, it's about being kind to yourself. And self-compassion has got lots.
Hard, though, don't we?
I know, we really, really do. Yeah, it does require effort and practice. And I mean, I could probably waffle on for ages about self-compassion, but usually there's lots of barriers to being self-compassionate, because we might worry, it's going to make me weak, or I don't deserve it, or it's self-indulgent. I just need to get on with things. So there can be lots of barriers to it. And also just that sometimes we're not used to it, and anything we're not used to makes us feel a bit weird and uncomfortable. But I think instead of meeting any of our failures or imperfections with criticism, try and meet them with self-compassion, which is where we acknowledge, okay, this is tricky, this is difficult. How can I take care of myself in this moment?
Okay, so number 3 on top tips to tackle low self-esteem: take on challenges to boost your confidence.
Yes, I feel like any listeners with low self-esteem are going to be like, oh, I hate this one.
Go tap dancing or something.
Yeah, why not? And I guess it's normal to feel nervous or afraid to do things, particularly new things. And it's so common for people with low self-esteem to avoid those things that they don't feel confident at. But people who have healthy self-esteem, they don't let this kind of thing stop them trying new things. So I would encourage people to set themselves a goal and to then go and do it. So whether it is tap dancing, joining a new class, going to a social event that normally you'd avoid like the plague, because achieving that goal is going to help boost your self-esteem and your confidence.
I mean, even to really go simple, swimming, because I think about my mum for ages. She would not go swimming because she just felt like people would be watching her in a swimming costume, and she wasn't feeling good about her body image, and it took her years to get over that. And then she became addicted to swimming, and she absolutely loves it.
And that's where you can build things up. Like with the learning to say no, you could build it up. If that was your goal and you found that you just kept putting it off, maybe wearing a bikini at the busiest time isn't the best place to start. Maybe wearing a swimsuit at the quieter time is a better place to start, and then building it up.
Definitely. Okay, number 2 is acknowledge your positives. Again, easier said than done.
Yes, it is. And it's funny you say that, because often when I do this bit of work with people in therapy, they're like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable to have to even do this, and to then say it out loud to me.
Yes.
But they always feel better afterwards.
But they probably had no problem saying what they deem to be their negative traits.
Yeah, of course. And that's the thing. People with low self-esteem often only pay attention to the negatives. I kind of think of it, I don't know what the name is, but you know those toys that babies have that have shapes, and then you put the shape through the hole and it goes into the box. People are probably going to be screaming at the podcast with the name of it, but I always think of that, and how it's kind of like people with low self-esteem only allow in, let's say, the circles, the negatives, and the stars maybe try and get in, but they just won't fit in, they just won't go.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that learning to acknowledge your positives is really important. And you can start off, literally sit down with a piece of paper and list all the positive qualities that you can come up with.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how small or insignificant or how unimportant you think they are, you've just got to write them down.
And then if you really want to give yourself a boost, just leave it out somewhere where your loved ones can see it, and your list of your top 10 attributes.
Post it to all your friends. Put it as your Facebook status.
Yeah, share it on Instagram. You might feel great afterwards, to be fair. Especially if people were agreeing with you.
You could actually do a poll on your Instagram. Send in my positive qualities.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, right. Well, we're down to the number one slot in terms of tackling low self-esteem. So is this the one that you think is the most important? Identify and challenge negative beliefs about yourself.
Yes. So this one is perhaps the one that would benefit most from being in therapy to do this. But you can do it without being in therapy. It's essentially trying to practice challenging anytime you have a negative thought about yourself. And usually the best way to do that is to practice writing down what that negative thought is, and then sort of analysing it. Try and be objective and look at it and think, okay, what's the evidence for and against this thought? And literally writing it down and listing it out. And a good question to ask yourself as well is, what would you say to a friend? So if you had a friend and came to you and said, I just failed at my exam, I'm just such a failure, what do you think? Would you say to your friend, gosh, yes, you are an absolute failure because you failed your exam? Or would you say, failing one exam doesn't make you a failure, look at all the others you've passed. And also, even if you failed loads, you're still a really good person, you're still a lovely friend, a good sister, daughter, wife, etc., whatever. And trying to then, after you've spent some time sort of analysing this thought, coming up with an alternative thought that feels a bit more balanced and a bit more rational. So the new thought that you come up with might be, I didn't feel great about failing my exam, but it doesn't mean I'm a failure overall, or, you know, as a person. And when you're in therapy, you practice doing that for your sort of more day-to-day negative automatic thoughts. And then as you progress through therapy, you also start working on more of your negative beliefs. And these can be harder to change. You absolutely can change them, but they just take a bit more work kind of with a therapist, I would say.
Yeah, really good stuff. Thank you. I did want to touch on, because you're a mindfulness coach as well, and I'm sure like it's become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't it, now, about, you know, at one point it was all just meditation, now it's mindfulness and meditation, or it's just mindfulness. And I think still people are still not so familiar. I know, you know, so like in terms of what you do as a mindfulness teacher, it's probably too complex to go deeply into, but what's kind of like an overview? Where are you trying to get people to be at?
Yeah. So I run an 8-week mindfulness course, and it's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which means it sort of mixes mindfulness and some CBT tools, maybe the one we just discussed around you know, identifying negative thoughts. And I guess the 8-week mindfulness course can be used to help people if they're really struggling with depression or anxiety.
You can sign up for it, can't you, on your website? Is this your Mindfulness for Modern Life course?
Yes, yeah, that's
cool.
The one.
And is this live? Do you do this live with people, or is it like something?
Yeah, it's on Zoom each week for 2 hours for 8 weeks.
Right. And the next one's September.
And a small group. Yeah, in September. Initially, when I did the course, it's called MBCT. It was the MBCT course that's designed to help people with depression or anxiety to sort of get them feeling better and prevent people having future episodes of anxiety and depression. But then they sort of revamped and done a newer version of MBCT, which is Mindfulness for Life, with the course that I'm offering at the moment. And it's brilliant because it gives you all the stuff that you get to help you with things like anxiety and depression. But then it also focuses on cultivating positive emotions. So trying to bring more happiness and joy into your life, more gratitude. And so I think it's a really lovely thing to learn, to be able to boost and improve so that you can feel more fulfilled and happier. And it's really great for things like burnout, just learning to be able to let go and relax more and have more of a balanced life, essentially.
Yeah. And if people are interested in learning more about your course, and just you in general, you've got some freebies. And I was reading the mindfulness workbook, and it's like, you're demonstrating that it doesn't need to be like you're committing to an hour a day or anything. It's like 10 minutes a day. And I just felt calmer reading each day. It's just, it immediately made me feel a little bit more serene. So I'm definitely gonna dig into that. So there's the mindfulness worksheet, and there's something else as well. Perfectly Imperfect.
Newsletter.
Yes.
So I've had a newsletter for a while now, but recently I gave it a revamp, and it's got its own name now, Perfectly Imperfect.
Love it.
And it's all about encouraging you to be kind to yourself and to embrace your imperfections with self-compassion. So it's great for people with low self-esteem or perfectionism. And it's fortnightly, so you get sort of a roundup of any of my recent helpful stuff, blog posts, Instagram posts, stuff that I've seen and thought that was good. I think people will like that. And then it also has a specific self-compassion tip for people to try out over the next 2 weeks until you get the next newsletter.
Nice. And like getting that landing in your inbox every couple of weeks, I'd imagine that's just like a really good reminder as well, because I think people have the intention of, I really need to start doing mindfulness, I really need to start practicing meditation more, and it's like it needs to become a habit, doesn't it, like brushing your teeth. So having something land in your inbox, not too regularly that it starts to get irritating, but just enough that
spam. I don't spam, I promise.
Exactly. Yeah, something to like make sure that you stay on top of it is great.
Gentle reminders.
But so to access all of this, the best place to go is your website, which is NatalieEnglander.com.
Yeah.
And you're also quite active on Instagram as well. The Perfectionism Therapist.
Yes.
Does what it says in the tin.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's at the.perfectionism.therapist. I mean, as you say, does what it says on the tin. I talk all about perfectionism, and also self-worth, self-esteem, mindfulness, self-compassion, all that stuff.
Yeah. You are very experienced in the world of CBT, but something I was reading on your website was that you passionately believe in online CBT, not just because of accessing it from the comfort of your own home, because geographic location isn't a barrier in terms of getting the right therapist for you, which is often the case, isn't it? Or it's, big waiting lists.
Absolutely. I think that's something that's been a positive from COVID, is that now most therapists are also offering online. And I think it's brilliant because it's so important that you find the right therapist for you and someone that you feel you sort of gel with, or you read their profile and you think, yeah, that sounds really, really good. And I guess you're just so limited when it's only face to face where you live, essentially. So I work with clients not only all over the UK, but all across the world as well, which is lovely.
Well, if you specialise in helping millennial women overcome perfectionism and building their self-esteem, then you must be really busy.
Yeah. There are a lot of millennial women out there, struggling with low self-esteem and perfectionism for sure.
And you yourself did.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a millennial woman, and I would call myself a recovering perfectionist. Which I guess that, along with being a CBT therapist and a mindfulness teacher, hopefully puts me in a really good position to help others struggling with those similar issues.
Brilliant. And I've got one final, well, it's not a question really, I sort of set you the task to set us a task, bringing our conversation full circle back to the title of both the podcast and this episode. I asked you to set us some gentle homework. And I know you've already shared a lot already today in the episode, and thank you so much. But I ask every guest, what is a simple project we can do based on tackling low self-esteem that will help us on our journey to building a happier life?
Yes. Well, I feel very comfortable with this because all CBT therapists set homework every session. So the one that I thought of that I think would be good is to keep a positive you journal, is what I call it. And essentially, each day, write down one example of something that you did that demonstrated a positive quality. And so I'd want you to have two columns, one that says positive quality and one that says example. So it might be in the positive quality, you write down kind. And then in the example, it might be that you listen to a friend on the phone for an hour crying about their problems. Or it could be that you write down the positive quality, considerate. And the example is that you flush the toilet after you use it. And the reason why
I would hope that that's just good manners, you know.
Hopefully, but the reason why I include that one is sometimes if people are really, really struggling with their low self-esteem and they can't see anything positive about themselves, then I would say, right, do you flush the toilet after you use it? Do you sometimes hold the door open for people? Do you switch off your light when you don't need to use it? You know, all of these things could show some sort of positive quality. Everyone will have positive qualities in there. So even if you've got to go to the depths of writing down that you flush the toilet, then that's what you need to do.
Can it be the same? Yeah. Can it be the same? Did you say it's one a day, one positive quality a day?
Yeah, go for one a day.
Right. Yeah. Cool. I mean, yeah. And maybe sometimes it's the same positive quality if you can't think of a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely fine.
The positive you journal. I like that. Even if you just put it in your notes in your phone, right?
Yeah, perfect. And sometimes it can be useful to just type into Google positive qualities and it will probably give you a whole list of examples of positive qualities like considerate, kind, caring, funny, interesting, whatever it might be. And that can help get you thinking a bit more about actually what positive qualities are there and do you show any of them or have you shown one of those that day?
Oh, lovely. Brill. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making it through to the end of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for some immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. Thanks again to Natalie Englander for a wonderful conversation and sharing all those tips, tricks and advice that we can all implement in our lives today. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. So do take care, and I'll see you on the next one.